who were calling themselves the Obedients. And what did I find? They want a different Nigeria. It was captured behind simple ideals, simple small sentences, from consumption to production. How do you move from consumption that saw over 1,000 people going for a conference that saw an unqualified person labeled as the chief scientist of the Federation going for a jamboree? That is consumption. To move that mindset to production, you probably see not more than 3 or 4 people going for that conference. Yeah, not because it's not important, because there was no need for the jamboree. Don't worry, I won't mention the names of the cross names that crept up in that place. Confidant of the president. Oh, how low we have fallen. That is an example of consumption. And it's just, if they will do that in the open, in your face, in my face, if they would, look, the National Library remains unbuilt in Abuja, but they are budgeting billions to build a house, billions to build a house for the vice president. Have the other ones been homeless? That is consumption. Those are the kind of ideas behind which the movement coalesced. Now, movement does not exist in a vacuum. See, NEPA did their thing. The reality of living in a country where it is more important for men to buy fleets of bulletproof cars than to improve the security of everybody living in the country. So NEPA has announced itself. We'll go back again. So the beauty of these ideas was that it could resonate in the different groups of people. Oh yeah, then they tried. They said, oh, it's an Igbo thing. And because of course somebody is shouting a Milocom and would root the legitimacy of his quest in a demand that power be shared so that each might take their turn to afflict. Yeah, there is an equitable basis upon which to make the argument that it was the turn of the Southeast. But if the Southeast had sent us Oji Uzor Kalu or had sent us an Okorocha, there wouldn't have been any, would it have been Okorokos movement or Ojiji movement? What would it have been? What would we have had to queue behind? So, like I was saying, for every thesis, there must be an antithesis. What were we all responding to? The Nigeria in which we are finding ourselves today, the one in which we live today, is one that does not have space or room for the idea of citizenship. It has no space for the idea of the rule of law. It has no space for the idea of equality. The audacity of the Obidient movement is that all those who have been disadvantaged by Nigeria across the length and breadth of Nigeria found themselves. They found themselves not necessarily because they were all lost, but because you cannot build anything, you cannot even gain a revolution if you are incapable of building coalitions. The Obidient movement is essentially a coalition of those who have been marginalized by Nigeria, those who have in one way or the other been victimized by Nigeria, whether those be Hausa, whether those be Yoruba, those who aspire for a better country, one that is hinged to reason, that understands the need to plan for a future for the children. Those are the people that came together and started calling themselves the Obidient. But before there was the Obidient, The Nigerian people have stayed within the track of what was available. And what was available? I'll show you. Before the Obidient, there was something called the NSAS. I'm not laying claim to NSAS before anybody jumps on me. I wasn't part of those who started NSAS. But just as I wasn't part of those who started what is today known as the Obidient, every good thing should attract good things. This NSAS movement was essentially a demand for citizenship. Nigerians queued behind the idea of citizenship, which was what the demand for the end of the SARS unit essentially is. That demand for citizenship was brutally put down by the Nigerian state with the active connivance of the man who sits in Aso Rock today. Let's be clear about this. So, when that happened, we had two choices. We could take to the streets. But there is a quote by Kwame Nkrumah, and I posted it this morning. And what he says is very simple. He says, revolutions are brought about by men who think as men of action and act as men of thought. When NSAS happened, we could take to the streets, we could encourage anarchy, but to what end? Systems such as evil as the one in which we live is actually happy when you engage it with violence, because engaging it with violence means that you never get to deal with it at the level of reasoning, which is what it prefers not to do. It will prefer that you carried cordials, go onto the street, burn tires. It sends in the mindless soldiers, the same sort that they had killing people at the Lekki toll gate and all over Nigeria, in Obigbo, in Kafanchan. The Shiites that are killed almost like they are flies simply because their humanity is discounted on account of sectarian differences. Just like the humanity of different ethnicities are discounted on account of ethnic differences or because they're simply following the orders. The humanity of persons are discounted on the order of the state by persons who are sworn to protect those who are meant to be citizens. So, after NSAS, we realized that the only way to have this change peacefully, at least that's what the system told us, go and vote. If we're a democracy, our votes should make the difference. Those who believe that their party is right should be willing to subject themselves to the public whom they pretend to serve. So, we went ahead, encouraged the people to register to vote. We were preserving the idea of citizenship, the same one that was behind NSAS, the same audacity. Look, let's be clear about something. Without the efforts of people who have gone before, none of us would be. So we took that energy from NSAS and asked people, go and register to vote. The likes of Yemi Adamulekun, the likes of Aisha, the likes of Rinu, Banki, hordes of people, Macaroni, people went out of their way, encouraged people. I must praise the creative industry, especially our comedians, people like Bovi, people like my brother, Basket Mouth. They all came out, encouraged people in one way or the other. AY, different comedians, different creatives, Kate Enshaw spoke to people, and the Nigerian youth began to coalesce around the idea of citizenship. They registered to vote in unprecedented numbers. The persons who are registering to vote were registering to vote believing that they would be able to effect change through the ballot. Yes, what is the Obidient movement? I'm explaining to you that the Obidient movement is that coalition of Nigerians demanding change in Nigeria, unhappy with the current trajectory of our country, unhappy with the way it has drifted throughout generations, worried that it is unsustainable in its current form, seeking that it changes so that it is secured for our children. Those were the people who, long before there was a Peter Obi, these people were imagined, so that they are called the Obidient. Let's be clear, these are Nigerians desiring change. We found a worthy leader in Peter Obi, because for every thesis there is an antithesis. The thesis has always been that Nigerian politicians are universally useless, unfit for purpose, incapable of effecting any change. I found in the lead up to the 2023 election that there was an antithesis to my belief about what the Nigerian politician represents. But as we quickly found, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, an idea embedded in a movement is not necessarily the same thing as a political party. Why have I been talking about, or what has led me to pick on what is the Obidient movement? It is because in recent times, especially since after the election, when the APC, particularly the Yoruba Ronu wing, had continued this campaign, even though elections are over, what I have found is that there have been concerted attacks on the idea of the Obidient movement, the idea of egalitarianism, the idea of the relevance of ethnicity behind the idea of the Obidient. They've been attacking that by ethnicizing a lot of things. I read a comment, for instance, which was what actually crystallized my decision to have this talk. And this cretin said the Igbos have destroyed the Obidient movement by their hostility towards the Yorubas, something along those lines. And then I saw other burner accounts, and I've been observing this pattern over some time, people working assiduously to spread tribal hatred, the Lagos state government particularly being deliberately anti-Igbo in its posturing in the public space. Anti-Igbo not necessarily because that is found on hatred particularly, no, but as a political ploy to continue to drive wedges between the majority tribes or ethnicities in the southern part of Nigeria, because it serves the political agenda of their master, the one that is sat in Aso Rock, which is essentially to build an alliance of the most conservative elements in the south and in the north, designed exclusively to ensure that a feudal state is preserved and the rights of citizens are completely taken away behind the veneer of ethnic hatred that legitimizes evil, religious hatred that tolerates madness. I'll build it out for you. First, you have Jatau, the woman who spoke about Deborah's killing, incarcerated. Then you had Tani Olong, kept in jail in Kwara State after having been abducted in Ibadan. Kept in jail and kept there until he more or less surrendered and threw up his hand, because the state deliberately ignored to protect him, because the state itself was the one that had legitimized his oppression. These forces sees nothing wrong in demolishing vast estates in spite of the fact that obviously somebody somewhere okayed this construction. Somebody somewhere was sat there watching this construction take place. Somebody somewhere did nothing, but the recourse is to demolitions. Let me be clear. I am not suggesting that drainage channels should be blocked, but it is not enough to visit ruination without ensuring that there are clear adherence to guidelines. It cannot just be that burning things, destroying things is the only solution to this. Let me repeat myself. I am not saying that people should build on drainage channels, but where was the state when this was being done? Where? And since when does any particular estate or neighborhood belong exclusively to one ethnicity? So let's deal with the issues, but so that I won't get ahead of myself, these are the ideas that coalesce the need for accountability in governance, the need to see change, the prioritization of public utilities, infrastructure. These were the ideas, a change in the way we see things, a reappraisal of ourselves, a redirection of our country. These were the ideas that continue to drive us until the time the man known as Peter Gregory Obi emerged and went into the Labour Party. I am not a member of the Labour Party, and neither a whole lot of people who identify as Obedients. The people who are sat in the National Assembly today on the platform of the Labour Party, they are not Obedients. They hung on the coattail of Peter Gregory Obi to go to the National Assembly. The movement itself remains alive and well because it is found on ideas and ideals. It is about change. It's about a revolution in Nigeria anchored on peaceful demand for change, unyielding but peaceful demand for change. The violence of our own demand for change is essentially in the hand of the state. We will not throw a stone. We won't carry guns. But we will not stop demanding that things should work the way it should work. At some point, we are of course going to have to move to some level of affirmative action in pursuit of our goals. But let us be clear. The idea to which the Obidient movement is the antithesis is the idea of feudalism that does not have room for the rule of law or for citizenship. The Obidient movement is the one that is saying that we are a country of people with brains. We can think, we can see, we know what the future looks like, we know the future we seek. We do not seek to live in this feudal state. We seek an egalitarian state where citizenship is available to those who live within its borders. That is the idea of the Obidient. So they turned around and called us fascists. That is how they branded us or have sought to brand us. But what is fascism? What is fascism? And what is fascist about the demands that we have made of the Nigerian state? We've burned no arms, burnt no bridges, not even thrown a single stone. We've been the recipients of broken skulls. Some people who have identified as Obedients have been killed. And I'm not talking about those who were killed before the name Obedient was coined, because those who died at Lekki Toll Gate, they want the same things that we are looking for today. So, as far as I'm concerned, it might be an appropriation of matters in the eyes of some people, but they died for change. And this movement was battered largely in the pool of their blood, down yielding demand for change, because we look to them as examples of what you would do if we continue to pretend that you are anything other than what you are as a state. We demand change. We are not rude. We are not fascists. And we are certainly not bad Jews. The real bad Jews are the ones sat in Aso Rock if anything, you might want to call us victims, but we are conscious victims. The conscious victim is difficult to victimize. Fool me once, you're wicked. Fool me a second time, I might be stupid. But make it a third, I'm definitely moronic. We are victims, yes, but we are aware. And it is in our awareness of our victimhood that we must also be aware that the only way we can ever be free is that we recognize that the common bond of the Obidient movement, yes, it is a movement, a collection of people behind common ideas. It is a movement. It's not a political party. It is not a political party. This definition is critical, because even those who might be estranged from this movement today would eventually understand the need to follow their own enlightened selfish interest, which is to change Nigeria. I remember sometime around June, July 2020, I had a chat with a brother in the revolutionary movement in Nigeria, and I told him that I was afraid that we were sleeping through a revolution. That was around June, July, or maybe even May 2020, that we were sleeping through a revolution. By the time we came to October and Lekki Massacre, NSAS and Lekki Massacre happened, I realized the unpreparedness of those who should be at the advanced layer of that revolution had compromised the revolution, because instead of leadership being offered to demand a different direction, the entire focus of what was a putative revolution was on the change of a police unit. And because there weren't concerted effort to focus the people's attention on what was truly required, which is a change in direction, a revolution, a different path to the one we were towing. What we found very quickly was that our failure to articulate clarity as to what was required simply meant that the panic system reacted in the only way it knew how to react, which was the mass murders that took place all over Lagos and other parts of Nigeria. So this time around, it is critical that we understand that this is not about ethnicity. It is not about religion either. And if you ever doubted it, the result of the last election, which INEC manipulated, refused to release till date, validates my position. Obi won across the length and breadth of Nigeria because you, the Obidient movement, those desiring change, regardless of where you were, you recognize the commonalities of your afflictions. You banded together. For the first time in the history of Nigeria, the thesis of one North, the idea of one monolithic North that votes in only one way, was comprehensively destroyed. Comprehensively, at least in recent time. The last time it happened was in 1993. This time around, it had to be the Igbo man, the prototype for all of Nigeria's evil deeds, that was the totem. That is the extent to which Nigerians have come to recognize the commonalities of their affliction. So those who would have flinched at the idea of voting for the Igbo man recognize that looking at the Igbo man in Nigeria today is looking at themselves, looking in the mirror. Because every affliction that once assailed only one, now assails all. For those of you who are in Sunday school, I said the parasite kills itself even as it celebrates the death of the dog. Once upon a time, those for whom the idea of an Igbo presidency was abominable were the lead cheerleaders for the Obi presidential bid. Why? Because they recognized the commonalities of the affliction, and they recognized that this is not about the good of one ethnicity or religion, it's about the good of all of us. We are not fascists, we are Nigerians demanding change, demanding to be treated as citizens, demanding the rule of law, demanding an end to consumption, mindless, stupid consumption. That's who we are. And if you don't know it before, I think you better know it. And if you're a member of the Obidient movement, and you have allowed yourself to embrace the pains and hatred of ethnicity or religion, understand that you weaken yourselves when you propagate those. You weaken the enemies when you meet them at the point of understanding of your own purpose, which should force you to tolerate them enough to educate them. Don't meet them with hatred, regardless of how much hatred they bring your way. They don't know better than what they are doing. Ignorance lies at the foot of every hatred. You who understands that your purpose is to change this space for your children and to preserve it for future generations, you are the ones who say you are a member of the Obidient movement. You have no guns to carry. You're not throwing stones. You need to win their hearts and mind. Yes, some have no heart and some are mindless. But do your own bit. And don't spread hatred. Don't join them. They will provoke you. Don't join them. Be sensitive to their ignorance. Do not let them lead you into validating their hatred. They say you are rude. We're not rude, we're forthright. Be forthright in making your demands. Yeah. Be forthright. I know. Like I told you already, it's one of those times when I'm speaking to a subject that I have not written about. But the urgency of the season demands that we should have a clear understanding of who we are. Ladies, gentlemen, they are Obidient. Those who desire to come and hear what I want to rant about today and are not members of the Obidient understand. It's not a political movement. It's not a political party. It's a movement demanding change. Join us. All you need to do is desire change in Nigeria. Okay? Have you blessed weeks?